Dragons are very complicated creatures to draw. A lot of them have 6 limbs, a tail, and strange pokey things protruding out of every corner of its body. But as much as they can be daunting, they also have a really awesome trait that far surpasses any animal. And that is, they do not exist. Sorry everyone who hoped otherwise, but there are no giant scaly fire-breathing bats residing on the cliffs of Dover. Since we have established that dragons are not currently ruling the skies, that means that there is no wrong way to draw a dragon. If you want to make yours resemble a purple octopus with the most luxurious ponytail, be my guest. In fact, taking attributes from real life can really improve the believability of your dragon. Maybe don't pick an octopus, but the point still stands. If I was new to drawing dragons, the first place I would go would be, of course, Pinterest. Not to look at dragons, though you can definitely do that too, but to look at animals that give the overall feel of what I want my dragon to have. For me, that is either a dog, large cat, or fox. Keep in mind that I tend to draw dragons with 6 limbs, 4 legs, and 2 wings. The animal you choose should generally fit the type of dragon you are going for. It's also a good idea to throw in a lizard reference or two. Okay, now that I got my references, I will start by blocking in the shapes. You can be more or less precise depending on your confidence level. It's important to remember that these are guidelines, not the finished shape. Think of them like a skeleton. I have fallen into the trap of adhering too much to my circles and squares and forgetting that most creatures are more complicated than that. For now, though, this works. When it comes to blocking in the legs, I really like to study my reference and look where the joints connect. This all adds to the believability. For example, for most dogs and cats, the elbow joint does not go past the chest. See how it can look a bit strange? Now, this is different for lizards. Their elbows extend away from the body. They're also very short. There aren't necessarily hard, fast rules when drawing dragons, but they're a good thing to keep in mind. There we go, so a nice simplified skeleton. I do later want to jump into more drawing dragons with a purpose, whether it's for animation or comic books or things like that, but right now we're just sticking with the basics of basics. So now once you got your skeleton, you're going to give it a bit more body. So sometimes when I'm drawing the dragon, I'll even draw a sort of oval shape between the chest and the hips, give it more of a torso to thicken it up, and then of course the lines of the neck. Okay, now I really want to start focusing on the head. This can be difficult because a dragon's head can take on so many different shapes. This, again, is where your reference comes in handy. Whether you want to do a more reptilian-shaped head or a more fox-like head, that depends on personal preference. For this example, I'm going to do what my most comfortable is, and that is more a fox-like head. So a long, thin snout and a more curved jawline. So remember, these are guidelines, and then when you're adding the actual details on top, you can stray from these lines. You don't need to adhere to them. So for example, when I'm drawing this head, I go slightly outside my circle, or I cut into my circle of the main skull to create the shape that I really want. The guidelines are just there so you can get an overall feel of the presence of your dragon on the page. They make sure your proportions stay even and kind of give especially if you're doing a more complicated position, then you can kind of see how the position's going to work before going into all the detail. Remember that getting the eye in proper perspective is extremely important for believability. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, this isn't a how to draw eyes video, but essentially if it's looking off to the side like mine is, you want to do a more rounded triangle shape. Another thing to note to make our dragons feel more believable is following general proportion rules. So a lot of the time I like to follow the corner of my eye and go back, and that's where my ear will start, kind of where the jaw goes up and where the corner of my eye line eventually connect. That's where I usually put the ear. This is just because that's how it is in humans, and I think it's a good placement. We recognize it, and so it doesn't look off. You also want to remember that the horns are going to protrude out of the skull. They're not alongside the skull. So you probably want to put them a little higher up and not so far down to the side. Okay, we're moving on from head basics. We'll be here for a while if I don't. So moving downward to the body, I will give the chest a bit of a sharp, I won't make it as curvy. You can do whatever you want. I like to come down from the curve of the neck and come out and then a straight line down and then back towards the back legs. I just think it gives it a bit more shape and a bit more stability. Also, it gives kind of an illusion of where a collarbone would be, and then that also helps me place my legs properly. So I like to draw a bit of the shoulder of the dragon, and then you'll see that I also like to draw the wing shoulder of the dragon. So I come down from the shoulder, come into the elbow, which doesn't go past the belly, go down into the legs and where the ankle is. I like to draw my dragon's feet more like paws. Sometimes I give them more claw shape, but I tend to go more paws. When it comes to the back leg, simply just looking at reference photos of quadruped animals is the best way to go. Remember that the knee and ankle are a lot higher up. What you perceive as ankles in animals are actually just where their toe joints attach to their paw, but the ankle is a little higher up. That's how you can get that kind of long paw shape when they're running. Makes more sense with pictures. When it comes to doing the back and the torso, I look at references. I've used to draw the back of my dragons very curvy and thin. I've started to thicken them up a little bit, maybe do a slightly straighter back, more like a cat instead of a dog. And once in a while, if I want to make my dragon a little less sleek, I will put the curve of the belly downwards instead of upwards. That's also a little bit more like a cat or a horse feature. When it comes to drawing the wing, I really like to picture essentially a human arm or a bat arm. You have your shoulder, you have the elbow, and you have the wrist and all the fingers. I traditionally give my dragon 5 fingers. I just like the way that looks. Now you don't have to do that. You can do more or less, depending on the dragon. Sometimes if I'm going for drawing a bunch of unique dragons, I'll do more, especially if it's got really big wings, but I tend to stick with just the 5, the 4 long joints, and the thumb, if there is a thumb. I like to put sort of impressions where you would see the hand of the dragon wing, and then I do just lines from there. I don't like coloring in those tiny, skinny bone shapes. I tend not to do that, and I think it overcomplicates the overall design, and so I don't do that unless I'm painting it. If I am painting a dragon, my process is very different, because I want to give it a more realistic feel. This is for more just sketching or a cartoonified or animatable dragon. After that, you can add all your weird spiky bits, and there is the most simplified dragon I can give you. So when it comes to me doing paintings of dragons, it's a lot different. I tend to do a more looser sketch that doesn't really adhere to any specific guidelines. I'm just trying to block in the shape, and then I also block in the shape with color. The sketch is just to get the composition right and to put a little bit of presence on the page, but when it comes to actually shaping the dragon, I usually just use color. Sometimes before I paint a dragon, I will do some other sketches to get the position right. So just some really quick, like gestural drawings of dragons just to get the position, and also maybe a little bit of the design elements if I want it to look a little different. But when it comes to actually painting the dragon, I start with a flat color, and then I'll use a kind of a jitter brush. Procreate has lots of these that come free. I think Procreate's painting brush pack is kind of underrated. There are so many amazing brushes that just come with Procreate. I think we get a little caught up in just buying and getting brushes because we see an artist we really like, and so we're like, well, if we get those brushes, we can draw like them. Yes and no. So anyways, I like to use a brush that has some color jitter. If you don't know what jitter is, it means you pick a color and then it'll kind of jump around to colors that are near that color as you're painting. I can't remember what they're called right now. I'll put some on screen that I really like to use. After that, I start using some really painterly texture brushes. So I'll use some really kind of smudgy brushes to get some other colors in, and now because I use that jitter brush, I have a lot of colors already on my page, and so I can just color pick instead of always going to the color wheel, which is really helpful. Oh, I also like to block in some just basic shadows and highlights. I don't know if I mentioned that. Now, you don't have to use all these brushes. They make it a little bit quicker, but I often pick 1 or 2 brushes, especially if I'm doing a landscape painting, and paint the whole painting with those 2 brushes. You don't need all these fancy brushes. I prefer working with 1 or 2 brushes that I really know and I'm comfortable with, because I feel like you want to be so comfortable with your tools that you don't need to think about your tools. You just want to be able to paint. So I would recommend picking a few brushes you kind of like and getting really familiar with them so that when you do go to paint, you're not having to scroll the brushes all the time. You don't want the tools to distract from the actual process. When I'm painting dragons, there is a lot less sketching and it's a more realistic feel. I tend to look at more reptiles, and I also draw things like the wing bones that I wouldn't do in a more characterized style. So essentially, my painting process is a more detailed, semi-realistic, partial impressionistic style of painting compared to the really line art heavy. I like to do both because both have very different uses. These more painterly dragons go in my landscapes more and are more just to give the environment some life and movement, whereas the other ones are more characters. I will animate them, I might use them in a book, I might create more of a backstory, which I'll get into, and I want to be able to draw them multiple times. They need to be something that I can somewhat quickly draw over and over again. So when it comes to drawing, anything, it's always good to think of the background of what you're drawing or painting. This doesn't mean, the shrubs and the trees and the clouds, although those are important too, but the story behind it, it doesn't need to be a complicated story. You want to give your character, whether it's a painted character or a lined character, a sense of place in the piece. So when it came to designing my new avatar talking head thingy, I picked some animals that I liked, and also I had to think about me as a person, my personality, my physical attributes, while creating this character. This gives it a little bit more, just personality, and gives the viewer a little bit more understanding of who this character is. So when I was first starting to design it, I have been really enjoying drawing very sharp dragons. They have the big, chunky face with a sharp jawline and lots of spikes, and are a little bulkier, more like, the classic tough guy dragon. That's what I've been drawing lately, but that doesn't really fit me. I am very short and I have very round features, and so that wouldn't work for a dragon that is supposed to represent me. So even though I really enjoy drawing those things, because it doesn't fit with the character I have in my mind, I have to think of and put the character first before just what I like to draw, if that makes sense. Now, you don't have to do this if you're just drawing dragons just to draw dragons. If they're not for anything, if you're not trying to make a character, that's all fine. This is if you're wanting to make your dragon have character and personality. So I struggled with this for a while. You can see a lot of my sketches, and part of it is I was just struggling sketching that day, and also I was fighting this idea of what I wanted and then also what I actually should have. So you can see that I'm slowly smoothing out the features. I give it a rounded bubble shape on the cheeks instead of the sharp shapes. I got rid of the feathered wings. I like feathered wings, but it was starting to look a little bit too cat-like at one point. So I got rid of the feathered wings and the fur and mostly stuck with a traditional dragon features like the webbed wings, the scaly tail, all those things. I very much like to draw dragons with fur and feathers. I really enjoy that, but sometimes it's good to kind of branch out and make your dragons a little bit more unique or more like a dragon. Like I said before, there's no wrong way to draw a dragon, but there are some dragons that look more like a dragon than others, if that makes sense. The traditional idea of a dragon, large, scaly, and sharp teeth, and really bulky and strong. So when you lean more that direction, it starts to read more like a dragon to most people, even though I would still call this a dragon as well. But it depends what you want to do, really. Well, this video is getting very long. Maybe I will do a step-by-step drawing a specific dragon for those of you who are interested in that. Well, I hope that helps, and good luck with your dragons, and see you in the next one. Goodbye!